Hi, I'm Nick, and welcome to Storytime. Batman Cataclysm is the story of the massive earthquake that struck Gotham in 1998 and began the series of events that led to No Man's Land when the federal government abandoned Gotham to the lawless rather than reconstruct it. Well, it all begins with Cataclysm, an event not long after Contagion, previously covered on this show, where Batman must once again face an enemy he cannot directly attack. The quake will kill many and leave many more trapped and in need of rescue. It's a story of human crisis, of human tragedy and triumph in a superhero context, in which even one of the most powerful superheroes in the world feels powerless. Let's begin. Detective Comics 719 ends with a prelude to Cataclysm as earthquake scientist Jolene Relazzo, who unknowingly works for Bruce Wayne, is picking up disturbing readings near Gotham. She attempts to call in the warning, but the Batcave is empty and the warning is missed. Man can walk upon the moon. He can build fine cities, explore the ocean deeps, and make the deserts bloom. But when the forces of nature conspire against him, when the great rock plates grind together and the very earth itself moves, all man can do is suffer. Cataclysm Part 1. Castles Built on Sand. He frowns as the images flicker for a moment. There is dead and unsettling silence. And suddenly, all hell breaks loose. That's the structural alarm. The seismic sensors. A roar like a turbine from hell fills his ears. The stone floor of the Batcave lurches beneath his feet as thousands of tons of solid rock are violently shaken. The computers automatically retract into their protective recesses. Kevlar canopies seal them in. Typically, his first thought is for the safety of others. Alfred! If the cave is so badly affected, what about the house above? And then the whole world seems to implode. Barbara Gordon falls from her wheelchair during the tremors and is knocked unconscious. Alfred is swallowed by the dining room floor as the room collapses. He disappears into the darkness below. Wayne Manor is only a mile from the epicenter of the quake. Its beams and bricks groan and buckle under the intolerable stress created by the heaving rock beneath it, and it topples into the abyss below. Stalagmites that took millennia to form crack like glass, plunging to the cave floor in a rain of destruction. The exit tunnel is still intact, barely. Perhaps he can drive out. The Batmobile is crushed. There's only one way out now, the passage that leads to the Drake house next door, Robin's secret getaway. But even that is denied him. An underground stream has been diverted by the shifting rock. It bursts over him with the force of a tsunami. A rock hits Batman in the head, and he is knocked unconscious, and the water carries him helplessly toward his fate. Teenage vigilante Anarchy and Detective Harvey Bullock are both closing in on the same gang of thugs when the quake hits the city. Shattering glass bursts outward onto the people into the street, killing several. Anarchy's line goes slack as the gargoyle he attached it to crumbles, leaving him falling toward the jagged glass. The quake has taken mere seconds to reach Gotham's midtown. Built on bedrock topped with shale, a potent amplifier for seismic waves as they undulate up and down, from side to side. The entire district is torn apart as if it were cardboard, its people swatted as if they were flies. Anarchy deftly flips and maneuvers safely to the ground amid the falling rubble. Harvey and Anarchy both take refuge in a sculpture of tubes, and Harvey tells Anarchy he's under arrest. First they have to run for cover before a gas leak explodes, barely escaping the blast zone. Anarchy says that people are in trouble, and he has to help them. Harvey can shoot him if he must, but Harvey soon runs after to help. Barbara Gordon regains consciousness and thanks her luck that her building is Wayne-owned, and several years back Bruce Wayne had earthquake-proofed all of his buildings in Gotham, despite the seeming lack of a need for it and much naysaying. Barbara sets off in her electric wheelchair to try and make it to police headquarters and find Jim Gordon. She passes a man stuck in denial trying to unpile rocks from a car, crushed so badly that no one can be alive within. The tortured roar of rock grinding on rock is done. A deathly silence hangs like a pall over the remains of Wayne Manor. The house which has stood for more than 100 years is virtually unrecognizable. Things will never be the same again. In the Batcave, the work of a lifetime is in shards. The only sound is the faint rasp of an old man's labored breathing. Less than 100 yards away, the world's greatest hero hangs precariously over the yawning chasm that has been ripped in the cave floor, mere seconds from doom. The news says that a 7.6 earthquake has struck Gotham just after 7 in the evening, the epicenter about 10 miles north of the city. Several people are trapped inside a city bus. The title of Part 2 is Shudder. The street is a confused jumble of concrete and vehicles. There's massive destruction across the city, and many parts are isolated by bridge collapses. Power is out everywhere, phone lines are down, and the water supply is precarious. The bus is stuck deep in a ravine and is slowly filling with water. Help is on the way. It has to be. Nightwing makes entry to Gotham by river from nearby Bloodhaven, where he operates. He can see Gotham already burning from the river, and he worries about Bruce, Alfred, and Barbara. Tim is safe in Europe, at least. In the bus, a mother comforts her child, who has found a glow-in-the-dark toy to see with. The mother says that might not be a good thing, seeing the crushed bodies below them. Nightwing picks up several calls for help on his radio as he weaves through the rubble. The streets are ablaze. In the bus, a hurt man has a cell phone and the mother dials 911. Nightwing is passing by when he intercepts the 911 call. He gets her location and leaves the boat. The woman is put on hold as the phone's battery dies. She comforts her child with lies of rescue as his glow light gives out, trapping them in darkness. The path above them opens and Nightwing descends on a rope, shining a light just in time as the water is rising. Nightwing asks how many people there are and begins to carry people up one at a time, children the most injured first. The survivors take numbers to be rescued. The scared child asks Batman if he's going to save his mom too, and Nightwing says that he will. But Mom took a high number and is staying back to help the others. 9 trips and Nightwing is getting tired. Mom is the last one left when an aftershock hits and the fissure begins to close. Nightwing tells the trapped woman there's a larger opening at the front of the bus, but she'll have to swim to it. He says he'll be there waiting. They both pound on the glass, struggling to break it, when the fissure closes. Nightwing emerges from the water with the mother safely in tow. He thinks to himself to enjoy the small victory, because there's a long night ahead and happy endings won't be easy to come by. The title of Part 3 is Lifelines. Lucius Fox is preparing to end the day at Wayne Enterprises when the quake hits. The power and phones go out, but the building remains standing. The Wayne employees watch from their window as Gotham collapses like a house of cards. Lucius reassures the employees the building is built to withstand the quake, as all Wayne buildings are, even the homes he's built. 7:04 p.m. 4 of Gotham's tallest skyscrapers topple like dominoes, killing 749 people instantly and leaving 53 others with major and minor injuries. Had the quake occurred several hours earlier, deaths in these 4 buildings alone would have numbered in the thousands. 7:05 p.m. Ruptured gas mains begin exploding. 7:06 p.m. The first major fires already rage out of control. 7:07 p.m. The roof of the GCPD partially collapses and the bat signal falls through the roof into Jim Gordon's office, trapping him under rubble. Wayne Manor, the private home of Bruce Wayne himself, was ironically the sole Wayne real estate holding that could not be quake-proofed. Built directly above an extensive cavern network, part of the very fault along which the quake has traveled, the manor has absorbed the full brunt and fury of the forces unleashed. Part of the structure has, in fact, collapsed through the thin crumbled crust of its foundation, and now rests as rubble in the main chamber of the cavern system below.
Help! Dear God, please help me!
Alfred! Batman tells Alfred to hang on, and he throws a batarang around a rock just as the part holding his cape breaks off. Batman climbs up the cliff and finds Alfred buried under rubble. He'll have to be careful digging him out not to cause further collapse. Barbara Gordon rolls into police headquarters and fires a gun in the air for attention. She rallies her troops, convincing them the best way to help their own loved ones is not to abandon their post, but to organize a response. Her own father is still missing as well. She says that doing this means entrusting helping their loved ones to strangers, but the minute that quake hit, they all ceased being strangers. She orders the men to hook up an emergency generator to the radio transmitter. Without power, the radio network is the best way to communicate with all the rescue vehicles. Meanwhile, Batman has found something to prop up the wreckage hanging over Alfred, the giant penny. With a shove, Batman rolls the giant penny down the slope of the cave, shoulder checking it at the right moment to steer it to where it needs to be. The penny wedges under the layer of floor hanging over Alfred, and Bruce can finally free him. Alfred is fine, even making a joke about never expecting his life to be worth this penny. All the ways out of the cave are blocked. Bruce has to hope the quake opened up a new one under the water. Barbara gets crews organized to fight the fires first, having them link their hoses to bodies of water because the water lines are down. They also have fireboats with pumps fed straight from the river. Bullock enters with a large piece of metal stuck through his arm. With everyone too busy to help him, Bullock slams his arm against the wall to drive the metal to one end and grips it with his teeth. Holding his arm down with his other hand, he rips the metal out with his teeth. Barbara tells people to find anyone with medical training and mark them with large red crosses any way they can, and set them to work on the victims while others excavate. She also sent officers to check on the hospitals. Bullock sterilizes his wound with his flask and binds it himself. Upon finding out Jim Gordon is still missing, he sets off to find him. As Batman prepares scuba gear, Bullock finds the Commissioner. Alfred warns Bruce the stream could run for miles without reaching the surface, but it's a chance he has to take. The cave has become a trap he must escape. Bullock uses leverage to lift the rubble pinning Jim Gordon, and he is freed. The fire department does what it can to fight the blazing streets, and father and daughter are reunited at last. Batman has just begun his long swim when the first aftershock hits. I'm skipping certain chapters because they don't take place or have much to do with the Quake storyline. They were just scheduled in the publication order. Azrael transports Bane outside the city and he escapes during the quake, but Azrael recaptures him. The theater crowd was just heading for dinner when the 30-second shock hit. Wrong place, wrong time. The title of Part 5 is The First and the Last. The 80-floor Davenport Center falls over as one piece when the basement parking garages collapse. 5 million tons of steel, glass, and concrete with people trapped inside. It comes to rest on the Gotham Electric Building 4 blocks north. A death sentence hangs over the city's cultural center. Huntress learns all this later. She was on the subway when it hit. At first she thinks it's just a derailment, but it soon becomes a Huntress situation, and Helena changes in the dark. She tells the people trapped that she can help them, but she is soon interrupted. It's a criminal who assumes she's there for him. He hits her with his gun, knocking her down. Huntress narrowly escapes as the criminal opens fire on her after killing a passenger who tried to reason with him. He and the others try to make their own way to the surface through the tunnels. Through a radio, they realize there's been a quake. Huntress can't risk letting him fire again with the gas mains ruptured, but when he tries to spark a lighter, she has no choice but to move. Huntress tackles him, yelling at the people to move away from her voice. He gets her in his sights again, though. The aftershock hits, and the man now screams for help. Huntress says the irony is that he killed the only man who might have been able to help him. She's not even strong enough to move the rubble with her wounded arm. He tries to shoot her, but his gun is empty. Huntress leaves him to his fate, and leaves the others to safety. Batman wouldn't agree with what she's done, but if saving scum like him is the price of being in his little club, she'd rather stay out. She thinks she's the kind of hero Gotham deserves. Harold, Bruce's mute helper, has tunneled away to Alfred from a safe area. Meanwhile, Bruce is swimming through the opened caves. The aftershock closes the path behind him. Bruce thinks that to get help into the cave he'll have to expose his identity, but it was bound to happen eventually anyway. Bruce thinks that it's his own fault. He should have mapped these waterways years ago. He has only one chance to get this right and so many ways to get it wrong. He squeezes through a narrow passage. He emerges into a current and has to fight being swept away. He loses his grip and hits his head, cracking his mask and tumbling toward a crevice. The current weakens as the passage widens and the temperature changes, telling Bruce he's in the harbor. He makes for the surface. Once Batman surfaces, he sees that it's not just the manor. All of Gotham is crushed and burning, and he finally sees the real problem. Catwoman attempts the daring daytime robbery of a pair of binoculars from a busy store in a mall. The title of Part 6 is Claustrophobia. She snags the binoculars she needs for a real job and goes back through the air vents. She's in the elevator shaft when the quake hits. She falls to the elevator car, but the cables begin to snap. In free fall, following the elevator, she manages to whip a pole and swing to relative safety. She catches a ledge and barely avoids tons of rubble crashing behind her. Catwoman crawls through the wreckage through a narrow space and pops her head out into a clearing. The mall has been devastated. Shelves and floors are crushed everywhere, trapping people. A security guard pulls a gun on her, assuming she's responsible because of her mask. She whips the gun out of his hand. Catwoman says she doesn't kill, and the guard says that by not helping a little girl nearby, she's killing right now. Catwoman goes to see what she can do, but the girl has a punctured lung. The guard accidentally causes more collapse, killing the people he was trying to save, and Catwoman tries to give the girl CPR. There's nothing either of them can do. She's dead. Catwoman starts freaking out, thinking she has to get away and be alone. She leaps to the ceiling and begins to frantically climbing up the levels of wreckage. She makes it to a window and uses her new binoculars. Catwoman sees the devastation across all of Gotham, buildings and roads in a crumpled heap. She comes back down, telling the guard they're on their own. There are 6 survivors, including them, and Catwoman begins helping them up to the exit she found. Outside, they gather on the fire escape. Catwoman swings across the gap to the neighboring building with a survivor hanging on, and comes back for another. She rests for just a moment before seeing what else she can do. In that moment, she grieves. I'm also skipping Robin because he's out of town during the quake. He flies back at the end and sees Gotham burning from the plane window. Blackgate Prison houses over 2,000 prisoners and 200 guards, sitting on an island in Gotham's Bay. The title of Part 8 is Isle of Men. Jared is a criminal sentenced to die at midnight, and though he swears his innocence, his every appeal has been exhausted. His caseworker empathizes with him, but it is cold comfort. A nun is there to offer last rites. The quake hits the island and breaks open the concrete shell of the prison's outer wall and ruptures cells and walkways within, including Jared's. Waves rush into the gaps and begin to flood the prison. The prisoners beg for the cells to be opened, but the guard in the control room is killed before he can pull the lever. Jared is free, though, and begins to swim toward it. Some cells respond and some don't. Those who can, swim to freedom, and those who can't, drown. Jared returns to the lawyer and the nun to try and guide them to safety. They head for the stairs. Jared and his charges make it to the first tier, but so do the other prisoners, and the guards fear being overwhelmed. Their fears are well founded, and soon the prisoners control what remains of the prison, freeing the others as Jared and the others climb across a narrow path. In the infirmary, Jared tends to the nun's wounds. She too now believes in his innocence, seeing how he's acted in this crisis. No one who acted so heroically could have murdered a mother and her 2 children. Just then, the KG Beast breaks through their barricade, angry that Jared didn't free him. Jared tackles the much larger man, yelling at the others to run. They slip past the fight, and Beast throws Jared through a glass window. Catman swings out of nowhere to attack the Beast, claiming he was just robbing cells. He distracts the Beast and dives away while Jared and friends escape. Batman surfaces and sees the situation at Blackgate, intercepting a nearby helicopter's radio. The choppers hover out of range of the prisoner's fire, and Batman weighs the situation. With enough courage, anyone can help the people trapped in Gotham's rubble, but few men are equipped to handle the situation at Blackgate. Though exhausted from the swim, he sprints for the bay. Jared has made it to the highest point they can go before reaching the prisoners on the roof. The prisoners begin to make use of a crude land bridge thrown up by the quake. Batman swims past them, reporting the situation to the choppers as he makes entry, knowing there are hostages inside. Batman disarms the prisoners and quickly infiltrates the levels of the prison. He's taking out multiple opponents with each movement, a machine of efficiency. The rescue choppers have half an hour of fuel left, and they'll need 10 minutes to get back to land. Batman tells them that's good enough. KG Beast, however, has found Jared and the Innocents, and he kicks a boulder down towards them. Jared supports a beam with his body, protecting the Innocents. KG Beast piles on more weight from above as Batman reaches the roof, throwing a smoke bomb and telling the choppers to move in. In the smoke, Batman quickly takes down the last of the armed prisoners. The choppers move in, their rotors clearing the smoke. By the time they land, Batman is gone, fighting the KG Beast. Jared tells the others to let go and escape while they can. Just then the aftershock hits, crumbling the land bridge with people still on it. Batman is taking the Beast down, but the nun won't leave Jared. He tells her that he lied about his innocence, that he did do it. Batman puts the Beast down with a kick, and Jared says that not only did he kill those 2 kids, they were his. The nun and the lawyer back away to safety. The floor collapses under the nun, and the lawyer grabs her. Batman saves the nun and tells the lawyer to get on his back. Jared tells her to do it. He's the Dark Angel they wanted. Batman swings away as Jared is crushed. It is 1 minute past midnight. Jared has met his execution on schedule. Batman leads them to the roof and the helicopters. Of the 2,103 men on Blackgate, 1,761 are still alive. 239 are missing, escaped, or dead. The nun, thinking about Jared, says that he did lie, but when, and about what? 10 p.m., 3 hours after the quake, and Batman finally makes it to Gotham. The title of Part 9 is The Naked City. Batman is used to fighting crime, finding clues, solving riddles, uncovering motives. But this? Fighting killers and madmen, this he knows. But a city turned against itself, helpless? A wave of despair threatens to overcome him. What can one man do against all this? But he hears a small cry for help coming from the rubble of a cafe, and he springs into action. After all, if he'd ever stopped to wonder what difference one man can make, there never would have been a Batman. He digs the man out, wondering what's happened to Jim and Barbara Gordon, Alfred and Harold, and Ace the Bat-Hound. He hands out painkillers and energy tablets from his utility belt, and he tells the survivors to stick together and make for police headquarters, and then Wayne Tower should be standing. All the quake-proof Wayne buildings will be serving as shelters during the crisis. Batman finds some homeless people he knows trapped in a restaurant. The girder holding up the rubble is already squeaking. Batman holds up the rubble while the bums rush out, diving to safety just as a beam breaks. They say that now the whole city will be living on the streets and will know how they feel. Batman tells them too to head for the police headquarters to see if they can help. Meanwhile, earthquake scientist Jolene Relazzo is kidnapped by thugs working for someone unknown. Batman realizes there are probably people trapped on every block of the city, and an aftershock hits as he's swinging on a line, causing him to fall and has to use his cape to land safely. The despair threatens to rise again, but then he has an idea. Penguin is making plans to loot the remains of Gotham when Batman enters his lair. At police headquarters, Barbara Gordon has set up a triage for the victims and is coordinating rescue efforts as survivors trickle in from all over the city. Batman says that the old rules are dead and buried. He knows that Penguin is involved in 100 illegal enterprises, and says the sooner things get back to normal, the better it'll be for him. And with that in mind, he asks the Penguin for help. He offers only his promise that if the Penguin doesn't help, Batman will make his life as miserable as he possibly can. Penguin wisely agrees to aid with the rescue efforts. And Batman leads an army of Penguin's thugs out into the night, for once in their narrow, brutal lives, to help their fellow man. Just then, a broadcast is sent from the GCTV building. A villain calling himself the Quake Master says that he caused the quake with unknown technology, and he demands a ransom of $100 million, or he will burn what's left of Gotham to the ground. We begin with part 10 of 16, The Batman Chronicles, a quarterly anthology book of short stories, this time set during the quake. Let's begin. The contract tells the story of some thugs who have been hired to work as rescuers. Some people imagine Batman saving them as they are trapped in a mall. A child worries about his father's building when they hear movement above them. The goons argue about the contract they signed as they clear rubble with a jackhammer. The contract forbade guns, but not everyone is obeying it. The thugs have been drawn from opposing factions, so there's less chance they'll team up and strike out on their own. They're being forced to cooperate to fulfill their end of the bargain. We can assume they're being well paid to behave. There's a clock on the mission. The building is slowly filling with water from underground, a process called liquefaction. They find the elevator shaft. One of the men drops a cigarette by an open gas line and causes an explosion. One of the goons saves the life of another, saying it was in the contract. He says they all signed, and Gotham isn't the best place to break a promise. It's one town that still has some honor among thieves. They start arguing about the existence of Batman, saying it's his credo they're upholding. The de facto leader says that the CEO wrote the contract, and nothing else matters. The people have been trapped for 10 hours, and they're their only hope. He puts out the fire with an extinguisher. The mooks realize that for once, someone's counting on them, and not just the people in need of rescue. Someone believes in them, and they get to work. The trapped kid asks his grandpa, how can you win against something you can't fight, like an earthquake? And grandpa says that when you can't use your strength, you have to be resourceful. The more creative you can be, the better your chances. Above, the goons argue about whether anyone's even still alive down there. The one in the hat says that every day he gets out of bed, he could get shot. And if he stayed in bed, he knows he probably wouldn't, but he still gets out of bed every day. Bull says he understands. They gotta help those people because they all got out of bed just like they did. They use ropes to descend the elevator shaft once it's cleared. They finally make it through to the level the survivors are on, and one of the men loses a bet because they're alive. Grandpa says they don't look much like Batman, and the kid says that maybe he sent them to help. The man who bet they were alive said that he just wanted to prove he could follow orders for once, that the world was wrong about him. The kid asks him if he was sent by Batman. He thinks for a second, says yeah, They were. He gives the kid the money to give to the shelter to help any way it can. The guys ask him what was that about, and he says, oh, it's that lousy contract, Item 8. Item 8 in the contract reads that in addition to not looting, no one on the team may cause anyone to lose spirit or will by their actions. It is from the desk of Bruce Wayne. The end. House of Cards. Tell me, detective. Do you see what I see? Your city has betrayed you. Gotham's crumbling masonry and toppled buildings have killed more innocents than any of Arkham's residents ever could. How many lie dead or dying? 50,000? Perhaps 1,000,000? What splendid irony that mankind's testaments to his own ingenuity become the agents of his demise during an earthquake. If the world would only embrace my leadership, their misery might end. Devoid of clutter and filth, I offer them a pure, harmonious existence in cooperation with the forces of the earth. Humanity must learn that it cannot always bend the natural world to its will, a hard lesson that every citizen of Gotham must now know with certainty. My own failed attempts at tectonic plate shifts force even me to bow to Mother Earth's superiority. The powerful and the weak, the rich and the poor, we are all subject to the cruel and transient whims of our environment. That is the one reality the aristocrat Bruce Wayne finally shares with the lowly Gothamites he patronizes and protects. All of your wealth couldn't insulate you from the fate shared by everyone in Gotham. Just look at your father's home. Even your beloved sanctuary has been violated. The earth has opened and exposed your secret to the light above. How will you possibly amend that? And what of you, detective? Gotham's mighty champion is forced to walk the streets and crawl among the rubble, trying to defeat what cannot be beaten. There is no villain to bury your fists into, no Bane, no Joker. Your childish yearning for vengeance can find no outlet. Now everything you once relied on cannot be trusted. The city's instability makes all your weapons and tricks unreliable and useless. Your small efforts are in vain. Regardless, you continue to pursue your perceived enemy with wild abandon, hoping to wrestle your untouchable opponent to the ground. Finally, you have encountered something that doesn't fit your naive perceptions of good and evil. Yet even in the face of insurmountable odds, you wage your holy war without realizing that you cannot save Gotham this time. I ask you this, detective. Who is the madman now? It matters not. Your blind obsession will not change this inescapable conclusion. Your city will never be rebuilt. It will be abandoned and eventually consumed by vegetation, erosion, and decay. Now you must look beyond your petty local interest, detective. The world beckons. Perhaps now you will join me and take your proper place at my side when you eventually surrender to the truth. The war is over. Your city no longer needs protection. Gotham has fallen. End. A bird with a hand. Penguin walks the streets of Gotham with his cane, and he comes upon a man trapped in the rubble. He asks him what he does for a living. He says that he's an accountant at a law firm. Penguin says that he'll pull the man out, but he will owe him a favor, and the man agrees. Penguin digs him out of the rubble and moves on. He finds another man trapped with a broken arm, and asks him what he does for a living. The man says he's a grade school teacher. Penguin walks on, leaving him behind as he pleads. He passes another man who says he can't breathe. Penguin asks him what he does for a living. The end. Trapped. A man is trapped underground in darkness, unable to move his legs. He has only a small penlight to see with. Robin is searching for survivors with a surveillance device, and he thinks he hears something. Robin tries to get help to dig the man out, but the rescuers are stretched thin as it is. Still, he says he heard someone with his microphone, and he's able to get 3 men to help. He says they can't be too deep, or the surveillance wouldn't have picked them up. The man hears something. He hears movement as Robin and the men above move a large stone out of the way. He hears more digging, and thinks they're getting close. Robin pulls a small boy out of a hole, and the man wonders why the digging stopped. Why don't I hear them? Where did they go? Isn't anyone coming? The end. Cataclysm, Part 11, The Day After Judgment. Nightwing bursts into the GCPD looking for Barbara Gordon. She's fine. She's been helping since the start. Robin bursts in next, and everyone is glad they're all okay. They soon realize that no one has heard from Batman since before the quake. The 80th-floor Davenport Center is still resting against the Gotham Electric building with all of Theater Row beneath it. People are still trapped inside. Jim Gordon asks who of his men is still in there. Detective Hawk emerges carrying a wounded woman. He says he's from Safe and Lofts, and had to help out. Gordon doesn't think he knows him, but Hawk says they've met a number of times, that he usually works the night shift. He's not used to seeing him during the day, and Jim realizes this is Batman in disguise. The news is reporting to the world outside, though no one inside Gotham can receive it. Someone leaves the news people a package. Dick and Tim peer down into the abyss that the mansion and cave have become. They realize that Bruce may be long past worrying about his identity being revealed. Bruce, however, is busy helping the last person out from under the Davenport Center right before it finally falls. Both buildings collapse in a heap and explode at the base. 4 blocks of Midtown gone in 1 second, says Jim. The news reporter arrives and hands him a tape, saying he needs to see it. Nightwing says he'll explore the cave while Robin goes next door for a happy reunion with his father. As Dick descends into the earth, he sees the debris of a lifetime scattered around him. Barbara says she always thought of the cave as sort of a clubhouse for the boys, and Dick says it was a lot more than that. He's not sure Bruce can come back from this. Just then, Alfred and Harold appear with a bulldozer, having made their way here from the waterway. He informs Nightwing that Bruce left days ago through a subterranean stream. The Quakemaster's tape is finally being seen by the police. He claims that he caused the earthquake with his tectonic activator, and threatens worse destruction unless his ransom $100 million is paid. To air the tape would only cause a panic, but they must act. Jim turns to look for Detective Hawk, but he's already on the case. Cataclysm Part 12, Master of Destruction. Hawk changes back into Batman while he listens to the tape. The Quakemaster demands a sack of cash be left on a bridge. He says the fault runs through the heart of Gotham, but the plate ridge runs hundreds of miles north and south, and they can't know where he's placed his device, an ultra-low frequency tectonic activator. He threatens a second, even stronger earthquake if his demands aren't met. Electronic distortion and poor video quality make identification impossible, but his details sound convincing. Batman seeks out an expert, earthquake scientist Jolene Relazzo, who was kidnapped in the last episode. She's been providing those details in exchange for her life. Batman finds her apartment empty. He tracks her kidnappers by their footprints, wondering if Jolene is merely being used or if she might be the Quakemaster herself. Lucius Fox guides people seeking shelter into the still-standing Wayne Corp building, quake-proofed like all Wayne holdings. The tape goes on, and the Quakemaster threatens crustal displacement if they don't pay, and says to avoid the fate of the woolly mammoths. Bruce looks up Jolene's file at Wayne Corp. Batman meets with Jim Gordon and gives his opinion the threat may be genuine. Gordon gives him a copy of the tape and says the mayor plans to pay the ransom. For now, they stall for time with a bag of newspaper left at the drop point. Batman says he'll handle it. A helicopter hovers overhead and grabs the bag with a hook, and Batman hitches a ride. Batman ambushes the thugs on the rooftop, disarming one of the Batarang. He asks who their boss is. Batman leaps over a bullet and disarms the other thug with a chop. He socks him in the gut and punches the other one in the face. One grabs him behind, and Batman flips him into the ground. They give up. They say they've never even seen their boss in the light. They don't know who he is. They say there might be 2 of them, one who never talked and stayed in the shadows, but they're not even sure the second person was there. Renee Montoya recognizes that the set he used is a redressed GCTV set. This was filmed in town. They find Batman at the abandoned set though, and he hands over the thugs who picked up the bag to be interrogated. Back at the cave, the team is finally reunited. Batman says the mission is still the same, to do everything they can to protect the people of Gotham. He tells Robin and Nightwing about the Quakemaster and shows them the tape. He also says that Jolene Relazzo sent a message on the tape, proving his threat is empty. Crustal displacement is actually a discredited theory dependent on Earth having a lithosphere instead of tectonic plates. The woolly mammoth reference was to the mammoths who died due to a quick freeze of temperate zones caused by what was thought to be crustal displacement in the past. It's a crackpot theory in the scientific world. Jolene was sending a coded message anyone who really knew seismology would get, proving the Quakemaster himself was no expert. She's also letting them know she's only cooperating against her will, and trying to help them. Whoever he is, he may not be able to cause another earthquake, but he does hold Jolene Relazzo's life in his hands. I'm skipping Huntress spoiler blunt trauma, as it's just personal issues between Spoiler and her criminal dad in a collapsed mall, nothing to do with the larger story, and it slows it down to a crawl where I don't want to. Moving on. Cataclysm Part 14, Shifting Ground. Nightwing asks Batman if they're up to this. They're watching a mass grave be burned to prevent the spread of disease, a grim necessity in the aftermath of this tragedy. Bruce says that Gotham needs them now more than ever. They'll help the trapped until Robin has a lead, and then they hunt down the Quake Master. Anyone who'd even lie to try and profit from this horrible event deserves justice. Quakemaster rants and raves on a closed-circuit TV at Jolene, who is not impressed. Robin says something is weird about the tape. The phrasing he chooses is odd. Some criminals are attempting to loot a safe when a trapped man begs them for help for his family. One of them wants to help, but his friends aren't interested. Suddenly they're shot with crossbow bolts. Huntress makes quick work of them, then hears someone tell her that's enough. Batman has arrived and intends to stop Huntress from crippling anyone. Huntress says she was going to kill him. They argue until Nightwing tells them there's people trapped, and then the rescue takes priority and they all work together. The people are loaded into an ambulance, meaning the roads are cleared enough to reach the hospital. Luckily, some were way-known and quake-proofed. Batman tells Huntress she could use a rest, but he doesn't have time to deal with her now. Quakemaster is furious he didn't get his ransom, and he tells his henchmen to go directly to the mayor and hold the ransom to the GCPD until further orders. Robin says that he seems to pause mid-sentence to choose his words, substituting new words for ones he was about to say. The cops get nothing from the thugs. Robin notices he used the word currency instead of bills, and prior in place of before, and then he has a eureka moment. Now he may have solved the mystery, but have you? Who do you think the Quakemaster is? There have been clues, and there will be more before the final reveal. Play along, I did. The fun of a mystery is trying to solve it. Barbara Gordon notices a canal crossing the fault line that coincides with Jolene's words filtered through Quakemaster's tape, and they find a possible location. The thugs burst into the mayor's office and take her and Jim Gordon hostage. Harvey Bullock and Renee Montoya draw close to the Quakemaster's possible location. Detective Bach went ahead and should be here already. Meanwhile, Robin has found Jolene's cell. Batman and Nightwing are busy rescuing people when Barbara tells them she can't find her father. Batman sends Nightwing to investigate, while he stays with the rescue effort. The cops are about to pull their guns, and a voice they hear when Robin stops them. Detective Bach is held captive by armed men as the Quakemaster taunts them from a wall of televisions. Cataclysm Part 15, Reap What You Sow. Note, this takes place before Harvey leaves for the Quakemaster's location. Catwoman realizes we are not in control of our world. She's spying on Poison Ivy, who's developed a super growth formula for a fertilizer, ostensibly to help the city. Poison Ivy commands her plants to kill the scientist working for her now that she's done with him. Catwoman evades the vines chasing her through the vents and returns to free the scientist, but Ivy says there's nothing she can do for him now. Mushrooms sprout from the man's throat as he dies choking. Ivy's plants wrap around Selina's arms as Ivy explains her plan to use the plants to help nature reclaim the entire city. Catwoman whips the tendrils off her and prepares to run. She leaps out the window and kicks a tree branch coming for her, and she chases after Ivy. And she's never found anything worth stealing in a greenhouse. Ivy finds Harvey Bullock soon after planting her fertilizer in the broken ground. A huge plant bursts up, winding through a building. Ivy begins to hypnotize Bullock with her pheromones. Catwoman arrives and snaps him out of it, and she uses her claws to snap a tendril near them. Catwoman says to try pulling out the roots, and she and Bullock work together to uproot the plant with leverage and a pole. It works, and the danger here is averted. Catwoman goes back to the lab to look for clues. She guesses Ivy plans to use her fertilizer in the reservoir and heads for the nearby reservoir park. Luckily, she guessed right. Ivy stands at the top of a tower with a vial. Catwoman whips Ivy's arm, but Ivy throws the vial over the side of the tower while Selina looks on in horror. Jump-kicking Ivy on the way, she vaults over the side and whips the vial, barely catching it while grabbing the railing. But now Ivy stands above her, waiting. Ivy scratches her, and Catwoman swings her whip up and breaks the vial in Ivy's face, her super seeds getting into her eyes. She gets back up as Ivy screams in pain. Roots extend from the inside of Poison Ivy's eyes, nose, and mouth, the source of her agony. She asks Selina to promise to let them keep growing, even after they kill her. Selina takes her to the police. She'll be fine. She thinks that we are not in control, even of ourselves. or we know better than to care about anything. Arkham Tales of Madness is a self-contained story in Arkham Asylum which is sealed off during the quake. It's a fun story with a lot of villains, but it doesn't fit into the larger story at all, and we're right at the end. Consider it a reason to get the trade paperback. Cataclysm, Part Final. Flattened. Quakemaster says that if the cops move, their partner dies, and the mayor's dead already. Robin tells Quakemaster to give it up. He knows who he really is. Quakemaster says that he knows Robin as well, and Robin challenges him to say his name. Quakemaster can't, and Robin says he couldn't say Batman's name either. Robin says his goons wouldn't even work for him if they knew who he was. He orders his men to attack, and Bach tips his chair back hard into the thugs, making them miss. Batman finds a dog guarding a specific spot, and he follows him to a trapped man. The mayor tells the thugs the city's bankrupt, there's no money for ransom. Nightwing breaks in the window and punches and kicks two of them at once. He turns the desk over to protect the innocents from gunfire. Batman follows the dog to more trapped people, crawling through tight spaces to find an underground area with 10 survivors. Montoya and the cops blow away the thugs and free the detective. Robin enters the back room where the wires lead, telling Quakemaster to drop the act. Have you figured it out yet? Quakemaster turns out to be nothing but a puppet used by the ventriloquist, famous for his Scarface puppet. He couldn't make a B sound that moves the mouth too much, so he couldn't say Batman or Robin. He says the Quakemaster made him do it, that he's crazy. Robin says he's pathetic and dodges his gunfire while throwing a batarang. The batarang hits the ventriloquist in the head and knocks the puppet away. Robin tackles Bach before he can be shot. Ventriloquist pulls out Scarface and his Tommy gun. Batman lowers supplies down to the trapped people, but he is trapped himself when his tunnel collapses. Nightwing chases the thug into the stairwell, pelting him with shurikens and making him drop his gun. The thug slams Dick into the wall hard. It crumbles the building with everyone inside. Meanwhile, the cops find Jolene Relazzo. Ventriloquist is escaping through some power lines, which his thugs fail to avoid. Power has been restored to this area, and Robin stops Bach from chasing him. It's not worth the risk. Nightwing grabs the thug and leaps from the collapsing building with him. Bach takes careful aim and shoots the Scarface puppet in the head. Ventriloquist stops, falls, and begs them to help him, saying that he needs a doctor. Batman crawls free of the rubble, his costume torn, and he goes to get the rescue crews. The people wish they could thank whoever saved them, but he didn't stick around. He did leave a clue in the form of a torn black cape. Alfred and Barbara re-establish contact and catch up, assessing the damage now that the worst is over, and rebuilding has begun. Some of the outer boroughs are totaled. Whole neighborhoods are a memory. Tricorner is still isolated. The Westward Bridge might not be back up for years. The survivors who haven't moved out already face months without regular water or power service. Life in Gotham has always been hard. Now it's closer to unbearable. I hardly recognize the skyline. It's because there's not much of it left. Over 100,000 dead is the last count I heard, and there's still a lot of Blackgate escapees unaccounted for. Gotham's going to be a long time getting back on its feet. If it ever does, at least it's over. For now. The end.